Well, thank you very much, Jessica, and thank you to the Northern Warriors that are still here at the end of a 2-day conference. You are the ones that really care, so thank you. But in Siri, I want to be serious for a second. Every session that I was able to listen to, infrastructure and the challenges of infrastructure in the Arctic came up. So what a great way to sort of culminate a great 2 days, and congratulations to Jessica and Madeline. I'm going to start off by asking each panelist, starting with you first, Madeline, and going through, introduce yourself. And since this session is on critical infrastructure, what is critical infrastructure to you and your organization? And what's the biggest challenge you feel that your organization is facing in meeting its needs? So starting here and going right down to the end.
So I did tell Aaron that actually I'm going to switch hats for this session. So I'm up here today as COO of Arctic Inuit Networks, which is still advocating to build subsea fiber optic from southern Canada into Canada's Arctic and through the Arctic. We have heard over the last few days, including from the youth and from industry and from defense, how important telecommunications is. And while we have Starlink and OneWeb have deployed their LEOs, low Earth orbiting satellites, and people are definitely subscribing if they can. If you live in government staff units or in government controlled units, or many of the landlords have said, no, you're not allowed to put the Starlink dishes on their property, so that is a barrier there. But as even Elon Musk says, nothing beats fiber. And we're even seeing with the government of Nunavut subscribing to Starlink, people are seeing a degradation in their accessibility and speeds of the Starlink LEO constellation. So there's that one hat. The next hat, I'll try briefly to introduce myself, is that I'm also involved in looking at energy solutions for Canada's north rural remote parts of our country, which also includes micro, modular, or small modular reactors. And as such, I'm a member of the National Indigenous Advisory Council and SMRs, which has Indigenous people from across the country. One thing I do want to say is that those members are also extremely aware that our communities need to be offered good information on all energy options and be provided information so that allows them to have informed discussions and make informed decisions. And as a result of that, I am a special advisor to the Canadian Nuclear Laboratory and to the Ultra Safe Nuclear Corporation that is working on with the Ontario Power Generation, micro reactors of the size of about 50 megawatts. Lastly, I'm the executive director of the Canadian Arctic Innovation Association, which spearheaded the study on the airships from a civilian and commercial perspective. And so you get a sense from just that introduction is that I really care about technologies with transformative opportunity, and that it can and should be wherever possible, multi-purpose. And most of this type of infrastructure is absolutely critical and necessary in our communities. It's the same requirements for the mining sector, and it's the same requirements that military and defense, want to see not only for themselves, but actually in the communities where they have to, often be requested to come in or have the ability to use our communities as a launch point when and where they have to go into our northern regions. So sorry, that was the shortest introduction of those three hats I could possibly do.
Sean, how many hats?
Just one. Just one.
Big one.
I'm Sean Boyd. I've been at Agnico Eagle for 39 years, 24 of those as CEO. Agnico is now the third largest gold producer in the world, with a particular focus on Canada, and a desire and want to be in the Arctic. And we chose to be in the Arctic. And we've invested almost $10 billion US in the last 15 years in Nunavut. We've built 3 mines. We've got another project at Hope Bay that we'll talk about, I'm sure, as we move forward. We're also probably the most experienced Arctic miner in the world. We also have a mine in northern Finland, actually further north than our operations in Canada. So we've got a particular skill set. And I think from an infrastructure perspective, I think everybody can see that, mines need a lot of energy, so we would certainly like a greener, cheaper alternative source than diesel, and that would be our primary ask as we think about infrastructure. But I think stepping back, not just from a mining company perspective, but from a sort of economic development perspective, the people of Nunavut selected 18% of the land mass when Nunavut was created based on geological potential. So they're in the resource development business. So from our point of view, we see opportunity based on our experience there. And what we want to see as a business up there is not to waste that opportunity for Canada, for the people of Nunavut. And that's going to require coordination, but it's also going to require an attitude of getting things done. Mining companies are used to getting things done. We're able to build a $1 billion US mine in 3 barge seasons over a 3-year period once we get going. So things can get done, and they can get done fast, and they can get done well, and they can generate tremendous benefits. So there's been a lot of talk, as we've talked about. Prime Minister Diefenbaker ran on a platform of investing in the North. That was 60 years ago. So it's time. It's time to do less talk, and it's time for more action around infrastructure.
Well said. Paul?
Paul Barrett, I'm the Chief Communications Officer for Davy. We build icebreakers transatlantically. We obviously are building icebreakers in and for Canada. We've got a total of 7 heavy icebreakers budgeted at around $8.5 billion, which is obviously a huge investment from the Canadian government. And we've also just bought a company in Finland, which is by far the world leader in creating these very specialized ships in Helsinki. I guess what I would say is that I think while there isn't a great deal of infrastructure, but particularly in parts of the North American Arctic, I think the icebreakers actually are floating multi-purpose, multi-use infrastructure. That's my absolute contention here. I think they help to ensure a continuous presence in the Arctic. Obviously, they project Canada as an Arctic power. They help maintain the rules-based order. They help defend territorial waters. They supply Arctic communities and industries. They can help with accident and incident response in the Arctic, ensure safe passage of shipping as that opens up, and we talked about earlier, support scientific research, protect our fisheries, and obviously even support tourism, and we've talked about that as well from an expedition perspective. I guess key challenges, well, one, we don't have the ships in service, and we've got a real urgency to get those ships up there. We know that, for example, Russia has about 6 times the amount of icebreakers that Canada does in its fleet, and all are deployed, and all are providing the services and roles that I've just described. So I would say another incredibly big challenge that we need to collaborate and work together on is obviously the procurement process. So how can we make sure that the procurement process becomes more streamlined and expedited so we can actually get on with the business of building ships to help the Arctic, its communities, and economic growth there?
Well said. Brandon?
Thanks. Hi, Brandon McDonald. I work with Pennycon. And I think for the better part of 25 years, I've been either owning or building infrastructure in various roles. So with Pennycon, I think it's a very poorly kept secret that we're building an airport in South Greenland. But you know, the critical infrastructure that we need, we're tasked to build critical infrastructure, but we ourselves need infrastructure to be able to do that, because if you're going to be, in some respects, first on the ground, you need people to do that. And so, you know, we need temporary workforce accommodation, we need communications, we need fuel, cache, and stores before we actually do anything. And so, you know, and that is whether you're in a northern remote area or you're maybe in somewhat of a populated area. If you descend on a small town with 1,000 workers, that's a problem for the town. So, you know, but those are the things that we need. Some of it you can sort of carry on your back when you come in. You can have camps on skids. You can get them up and running in very short order, and it takes a special breed of person to be the one to go in and do that. So we work with clients. We help them understand the logistics of that, because we've developed that expertise a little bit through working in remote and Arctic areas. But you know, those things I would say are critical for us to have ourselves. That's the critical infrastructure that we need to be able to build infrastructure for the community or for the owner, the developer.
If you build it, they will come. So you need the infrastructure to build the infrastructure.
Yes.
Jim.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jimmy Unalik. I'm the president of the Canadian Northern Economic Development Agency. It's a federal agency responsible for economic development north of 60, so the 3 territories. We also have a special role in coordinating the federal participation in environmental assessment processes in major projects in the north. And I was surprised to find out when I signed on to my position that I'm the co-chair of the Deputy Ministers of the Arctic Committee. My background is coming from the government of Nunavut. I have a little bit of infrastructure PTSD from there related to infrastructure issues and challenges. But really importantly, and I just want to thank Sean, a formative experience in my background was up until 7 years ago, I was responsible for on-the-ground logistics in Rankin Inlet to help support the construction and operations of the Meladine mine. One of the key challenges that, you know, coming from Nunavut and having a broader mandate across the 3 territories, and we hear it in almost every conversation, is energy, and making sure that there are green energy options for mining, but also in a backdrop of communities who are struggling to maintain basic power. So it's a bit of a juggling act, but I think, you know, in our role at CanNor as a convener of federal departments and working with our ministers, there's a real opportunity to leverage the interest and the money that's been floating around the system and turn it into concrete construction. Because that's, I agree 100%. You know, we have to figure out a way to more quickly build and deploy infrastructure. Thank you.
Perfect. David.
Thank you. Dave Thompson, Director General Portfolio Requirements with National Defense. So it's a fun job because I'm the requirements guy. And I'm actually looking for more. There's not enough of it. This is a joke. There's way more requirements than we can afford. So that's part of my job. So it's basically the portfolio manager. So it's really about ensuring that Canada's armed forces has the right real property infrastructure at the right time to ensure that they can do what they need to do. Been at National Defense on and off for about 18 years. Every time I leave, I just love the mandate. Sorry. So I always get pulled back in. In this role, when we talk about critical infrastructure, every piece of national defense infrastructure is critical. But if you say that, then you get down the challenge of if you defend it all, then you really can't defend anything. So really, this is important in terms of supporting vital assets and the most key Canadian Armed Forces capabilities. Perspective here in terms of importance now. We've announced $38.6 billion for NORAD modernization. The world has changed, and we really want to move forward with that. So we have a very aggressive timeline, significant amount of infrastructure going in both the north and the south. So thank you.
Thank you. As you can see, we've got a great panel with a real depth and breadth of experience with infrastructure. But the other part of this panel is multi-purpose and multi-user. We have to have the multi-user, the multiplier effect in the Arctic more than anywhere else in the country. So I'm going to pop up the next slide and ask Sean to kick off this part of the discussion. Sean's described mines as sometimes creating a hive of community and opportunity in the part of the region that they're located in. Obviously, Agnico Eagle is very invested, as he said, in the Arctic. So Sean, two things. I'd like you to walk us through your properties, your projects. Talk about the Hope Bay in particular, and then how your infrastructure investments, we see the photos on the side, become a hub, a multi-user, multi-purpose lifeline for infrastructure for that part of the Arctic.
Yeah, okay. There's a lot of angles on one picture here, and there's a lot of background, there's a lot of stories here. But I will go back to we chose to be here. And you have to think long term and you have to be patient. So the first mine was Meadowbank. We bought that off of Cumberland Resources in 2007. And we built that, and it was producing in 2010. So basically 3 years from buying it to building it, which again is fast, particularly, as you know, in that part of the world. We took about $1 billion write-down on that investment. $1 billion. We're still there. And we have to explain to investors in London and New York why it still makes sense for us to be there. But we kept drilling. We found Amaruq, which is one of our largest producers now, producing about 500,000 ounces. Short mine life now. That spawned Meliadine and Rankin Inlet. So a tremendous base. But I think the interesting one about future infrastructure, and just around Meliadine and Amaruq and Meadowbank, we've built about 300 kilometers of roads. So we're the largest road builder in Nunavut. We're a third of the GDP in Nunavut now with that base. Hope Bay is interesting because this is a project that can tie all the points that we've been talking about over the last couple of days. Sovereignty, defense, look at the location there. Likely why the federal government said to the Chinese, no, you're not going to own Hope Bay. That was announced on December 22nd. We had that deal wrapped up in 2 weeks to get that done. And you'll laugh because a couple of Liberal cabinet ministers who didn't really know too much about what was going on actually called and thanked us for actually saving themselves on that and picking it up. But we decided to do that because it's on 2 major geological belts. But there's probably been over $3 billion US already invested there. Newmont went for over $2 billion. They bailed. TMAC struggled. They sold it to the Chinese. We now have it. To do exploration up there is about $100 million a year, just to explore. That project right now is not economic. It's not economic. It'll cost over $1 billion to build, but this is one that'll benefit from infrastructure and investment. And this is one that we've been making the case in Ottawa that this should be built for sovereignty issues, for defense issues, for economic development issues, because our experience is once you build a production platform, generally you're on major geological trends If you've got good exploration people and you're committed to spend $100 million a year, you'll likely find a lot more. So the idea is that we don't go a lot of places in the world. So we're the third largest gold producer in the world. We only operate in 4 countries versus Barrick in 16 countries, and we're not too far behind them. We've chosen this region for a reason, because we want to be there. And we see tremendous potential, but it's not easy. And so everybody just thinks now with critical metals that we can just line up a series of deposits and start building tomorrow. We can't. We still have to find them. And it goes back to something that all mining people know. Mines are made, they're not found. And this is the perfect example of opportunity, but you're going to need everybody working together. You're going to need Inuit businesses and communities. You're going to need governments at all levels. You're going to need technology to help us here, but you're going to need mining expertise. And so when you look at Newmont, not to disparage Newmont, biggest gold company in the world, but they're based in Denver. What you want to develop the potential of this part of the world, you want this done by Canadian companies, run by Canadians, based in Canada. Why? Because we get it.
Yeah, and you've developed Indigenous partnerships throughout the process and take that partnership seriously. Before I move on to the other panelists, I want to talk and relate this to what Jim Balzilli said yesterday when we were talking about the naval refueling station in Nenisivic not being completed. You know, Stephen Harper announced it 16 years ago. There's good intention on all sides to get it done. Jim said, you know, the port should have gone there instead. Rob's talked a lot about lessons learned and after-action reports. Can we now learn that we should really be tying that military multipurpose, that economic multipurpose, that sovereignty multipurpose to investments like Hope Bay and that part of the Arctic? Because you're going to need port, aerodrome, roads. We might as well have the multiplier effect of public-private security investments all in the same place.
That's where the coordination and the mapping comes in, is that there is going to be money spent on infrastructure here, and it's going to be a lot of money over time if we want to take advantage of the opportunity. So it's going to be what and where, and that's going to be the key. You can't just throw money at this. You've got to be surgical on where it is and why it's going to be there. And part of that's got to be based on where the mineral potential is, and then try to connect the dots with all the other needs of the country.
Jim, I'd like to come to you next to kick off discussion, because Sean has talked about 300 kilometers of roads. We see air service. We see, you know, down the road, naval and support through barges and icebreakers, floating barges, right? How have you seen this impact other businesses and the wider community from these investments from the private sector?
You don't have to look very far in Rankin Inlet or Baker Lake to see the impacts of small business or even medium-sized business. The relationship that Agnico's developed with the Birthright corporations has a multiplier effect on infrastructure, in that they're now looking at sectors using the Agnico base customer revenue and then pursuing green energy projects or projects outside of this sphere. But it's that core economic activity that becomes a big driver for a lot of the other activity in the region. So in addition to that, the infrastructure that Agnico and others have really amazingly quickly brought online has added a lot of knowledge and value to the communities. You see you know, it sounds like a small thing, but the people who are maintaining the roads and who are building the subdivisions where new housing are going to go, they're Agnico alumni, and I think on that piece, it's really important to recognize.
The ripple effect is unbelievable. Mm-hmm. So, David, are you ready to move Nenisivic down to this part of the Arctic?
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, so maybe I'll leave it at that. Look, I think...
I should have asked Yvonne that question earlier today.
Yeah, and look...
Is D&D open to partnerships like this? You know, traditionally, it hasn't been the way it's operated. Can this happen in the Arctic?
So with the speed of change that we're looking at, we are very interested in partnering across the board on a myriad of projects and programs going forward. It's already challenging in the south to build on time and scope. So of course in the north it's an even harsher environment as well. So partnering just makes sense. If I look at NORAD mod, NORAD northern pacing. So as part of that, we are rebuilding and constructing 4 forward operating locations. Part of that work includes our new future fighter capability, which we will require partnerships to make sure that we have that at the right time. But we're also looking at multi-purpose, multi-use infrastructure at those locations as well. So our teams of land planners have both shared the types of infrastructure which we need, but we have also heard from local communities as well and been very open about what the local needs are now, but also what they may be, so that we can try to find a way to partner going forward. So I think this example here, both from a local community aspect, but perhaps with industry at large as well, if there's a similar need, so if there's a similar airfield need in a location, it makes sense to partner on that. I think also because of the size and scale of the amount of work going in, we're going to have to coordinate as well, so that we are preventing to the extent possible competition with trade. So if we can plan these things together a little bit more earlier in, then I think there's a lot of opportunity going forward.
We used to say in the military, force multiplier. It would multiply your effectiveness. Any other thoughts on this topic of multi-use, multi-purpose when it comes to investment in infrastructure priorities?
I mean, one thing I'd like to point out, I think it was the first session when we talked about the need for an Arctic policy, right? It seems a long time ago. Was that this morning? Or was it yesterday? I can't remember. Actually.
That was yesterday, but there's a nice story in Bloomberg and the National Post.
How sharp I am today, right? I think one of the things was very interesting, and then Jim Basili came in and he got some media around the need to create a coordinated Arctic strategy. And what I actually was thinking about was, can we make that Arctic policy framework and whatever other inputs we get into more than a strategy, that it actually becomes an Arctic infrastructure blueprint, indigenous-led, fully funded, politically ring-fenced, and that connects really nicely with the stuff that's going on with Arctic360 and ConvergeX with this mapping project, and it helps that we could then be more surgical in the choices we make in terms of infrastructure development. So I think that's something that I think we need to move towards. There are so many fantastic ideas. How do we put that into a framework which is going to stimulate economic development and have these infrastructures in place sooner rather than later?
So from framework to strategy to blueprint.
Yeah.
Okay,
exactly.
We're evolving here. Any other
funding,
comments
don't
on
forget.
this multi-purpose aspect before we move on to the next question?
So I'd like to jump in. I was shocked and surprised when I was mayor to learn, when we were looking at the possibility of an energy solution in Iqaluit, the city of Iqaluit was not invited to be a stakeholder in those consultations. And I was like, what? And then to find out that the mine nearby, Chidliak, which was, has potential diamonds, were also not consulted. And you would think that, why wouldn't you? I mean, you're not going to mine diamonds by diesel. And the city of Iqaluit, believe me, we are not only a consumer of power, but we also have a role in looking at our economic development opportunities. So that's just one example, and I think everyone here has a long laundry list of missed opportunities because we looked at things too narrowly. We don't have enough money to do everything that's needed. And the value of actually seeing, even this tiny map is that there is so many things to consider. You've got marine and territorial protected areas. You've got different types of minerals. You've got different players and actors on the ground. And so you can look at potentially an energy solution that is potentially, a mine with the communities nearby, in that region as well. You've got the potential for, that runway in Rankin Inlet had to be paved and expanded, a new airport terminal that meets the needs not only of the community, but of the mine and of the region, because it's a regional hub. It serves more than itself. So there are many things that are already, kind of multi-purpose, but not scaled up to be truly multi-purpose unless forced to, or ideally we're a lot more strategic. So when Paul and Kim speak to about this potential mapping tool is to try to put everything down. There is no single place that is accessible and concise that shows you the state of energy, telecommunications, and transportation in one place, let alone it being interactive, let alone being, a tool that allows for, if you're interested in a potential energy solution for a community or a region, being able to do comparative analysis. We have artificial intelligence. You can put all this data in and almost do like a Sim City and sort of see where there is opportunities, where there are gaps. I was shocked when I was actually helping with the airship study that in Northern Ontario, there were investments to upgrade a power grid, and they underinvested, and it turned out almost like our water situation in the north is that it actually couldn't expand and build more houses or more public institutions and schools because it had been an underinvestment. So it's really important to actually have all the people in the room. I can tell you when you're building out a telecommunications cable, if you're not talking to not only your current users, but your other potential users, you're missing out. The military have very distinct requirements. And so you need to look at whether or not you're talking about dark fiber pairs within an existing system or a supplemental dedicated, fiber line, but it's cheaper to build those two systems at the same time. So you don't want to miss out by having proponents, especially if it's government funded, building infrastructure that is not multi-purpose or not multi-purpose enough, or ending up not having all the future-proofing elements and aspects. When Greenland overbuilds their energy, which they have in Nuuk, guess what? It unlocked all sorts of other opportunities. So it wasn't just about energy for electricity, it was also then heat. It was also then an incinerator was possible, a way to deal with their garbage. It was also the ability of them building a concrete plant, because that requires a lot of energy, to use concrete as a foundation. It also was an ability now for e-vehicles. But that's because they understood you may only initially think of okay, what do I need now? And then it just blossoms and blooms.
Have everyone in the room. Jim, did you have something before we move on?
Very, very briefly, I hear the points on their requirement for a clear policy direction, and I'm not going to dispute that, but I just want to make sure that in this conversation around infrastructure, we don't lose sight of the nuts and bolts aspect of all this, where project management is going to dictate how interoperable a lot of the infrastructure is. Like, we need the right geeks in the room together as they're designing things, and being able to share that core information. I think we often treat this as a policy issue, and it needs to be a bit more of a mechanical issue.
All right, to wrap it up, Brendan.
So being one of the geeks that likes to be in the room, I've seen a lot of infrastructure projects go off the rails because, contractors are sort of, a lot of times they're the last thought, right? The contracting strategy is the last thought. And so by the time it goes to market, there's a disconnect between what is the actual price to do this and what was the budgeted or the business case price very early on in the game. And there's a lot of new, different, novel contracting strategies that pull that piece earlier into the process that help inform, but not just to inform the cost, but to help influence the design. And they're perfectly competitive. It doesn't need to be some sole source, gift handed to a company. It can be a perfectly competitive process, but it incorporates that knowledge and that geeking out, if you will, of shaping what that infrastructure is from a constructability point of view, and hence a cost point of view.
Yeah, those 2 points on making sure you can do it properly and keep in budget. The reason these worked, we're our own general contractor.
Yeah.
We build our own mines. We use expertise, and we buy expertise, but we do it ourselves.
Yeah, because I did some tendering as a lawyer before politics, and there's disputes over any mega project because there's deficiencies in the bid materials, and so the cost delays and overruns and everything usually come as a result of people knowing the bid materials are incomplete. So running your own show, I think, is key, and having the geeks in the room. I want to move on to the next part of the topic because we've talked multi-purpose, multi-user. One of the key partners, one of the key multi-users, one of the key people you need in the room, as Madeline said, are Indigenous development corporations, which have done incredible work in the last couple of decades. I'd love any thoughts on partnering and working with them, but I also want you to weigh in on, do they have the tools and the legislative framework needed to raise the capital they need to do their job? Do they have the governance? Where do we need to see improvements there so that they can increasingly help advance these projects? Anybody want to start on that topic of the Indigenous Development Corps?
I think we're a bit nervous because we're not the development corp. But what I can say is that I think that is a very complicated question, and that there is no single answer because they are quite diverse themselves from across the north. There's different sizes of development corps and effectively different mandates. And like any sort of company, effectively they are, you do also have sort of changes in priorities in developing or assessing opportunities. I know what I can honestly say from, I think there's been missed opportunities in the past, and I'm aware of them, where like the Iqaluit Airport or Iqaluit Port, where the development corporations would have liked to have participated, and they competed with a government RFP. They were not successful, and also there was a potentially missed partnership. I think the fact that there's now a lot of federal funding that where it is dedicated or requirement to see Indigenous participation in major projects and investments, and we've seen that with announcements, as recently with the Canadian Infrastructure Bank and with SMRs, is the industry has a much clearer indication that you better get to know Indigenous development corporations and start those relationships now. And the challenge will also sometimes be is, well, who are you? And I can tell you, as someone who is in business, is that there's a lot of times where southern businesses will come and just expect me to be an instantaneous partner. And there's a lot of risk associated with that. And I've seen, and this is even just on the Inuit business, which is different than the Dev Corps, where you may not have a business savvy person that is being partnered with. And so it's complicated, but we need to see more of those partnerships develop, and they're true partnerships.
Maybe I'll just add, it's come a long way since we arrived in Baker Lake in 2007, where the capacity has certainly increased, the sophistication has increased. You'll continue to see that as more activity happens, but at the end of the day, these are all just relationships with people. And we find in Nunavut, you can be going along smoothly and then you'll get a bit of a roadblock. And you're able to manage through that based on relationships that you've built up over time and the trust that you've built up over time. And that's the way you operate here. And so you look at capacity, sure. We have to bring a lot of skilled capacity from southern Canada. We have to do that. We're hoping that as we go into the future that we do less and less of that. We're in Mexico and we've got a business with 2,000 employees and basically they're all Mexicans from the top of the management team to the bottom. There's a lot of work to do in Nunavut, which means there's a big opportunity to increase that experience, that talent level, that skill set. The relationships are strong. You just need to round it out now. With a bit of capacity and more skill and experience.
Can I just ask a quick question? Are there any areas where you don't just do it yourself in terms of the developments you're talking about, that you do have to, collaborate in a slightly different way? And is there another model, or is it always that we do this ourselves because we know how to do it and we can trust in the process?
Yeah, that's it. And that's how we built the entire company. We built all of our mines. And you look at big disasters in the mining business on CapEx blowouts, you see them all the time. And that's because basically mining companies will then hire someone, turn it over and say, call us when it's done. Well, you're going to get weather reports along the way that aren't going to be good, if you do that. And so what we tend to do is the people that are going to end up running it get involved from day one on how it's going to get built, because they can't say, oh, you built me a pile of crap here. And so that's what we found works in our entire business. I think it works more here because you got to be on top of it, because you're trying to do this over a 3-year period and you're trying to invest a lot of capital in a short period of time in a challenging environment. So we find it works well. Others, Newmont, I'm not sure how they did that, but they were in for, I think, $2.2 billion US and decided it's not going to work, and off they went. So you got to be careful.
Very much. Any other comments? David?
I'll just share that D&D joined the ICPC not too long ago in terms of working together in potential partnerships with firms. And as part of that, some code development work, which led us to 4 measures going forward. One, which is that national defense, where feasible, will build multi-purpose, dual-use infrastructure. And I bring that forward because as part of that as well, the department is committed to at least 5% of our contracts being led by Indigenous business as well. So this lines up very closely with that. And in 2023, we also launched an Indigenous reconciliation program whereby there's $1.5 million available per year to help with this work. So that is a fund available to Indigenous communities to enable that engagement back and forth to see how we could partner more. So they're very much not only wanting, but we do need this to move forward in terms of meeting our timelines collectively.
Yeah, in British Columbia, Ontario have similar funds for capacity building, for the ability to help development corps reach that goal. Before I take any questions from the audience, I want to get some thoughts on energy, because as we went through the introductions across the way, the one issue that everyone except one mentioned was energy. And it's everything from river run hydro to people talking about the potential longer term for small modular reactors. Is this the perfect example of multi-use, multi-purpose, multiplier effect, critical infrastructure, and what's the role of the federal government? Any thoughts any of you have on energy and the energy deficit in parts of the Arctic? Jim?
I think it's exactly that. Like, I think you have just the need is so great. My brother-in-law is probably at the power plant in Rankin right now trying to figure out how to get more oil into a 60-year-old generator tonight. But it's also, you know, when you think of infrastructure and you think of development in the north, you have to think of proponents. And I think that that multi-use can be a euphemism for nobody's raised their hand to do it. And in a lot of ways, it's to the earlier point on the development corporations, you're seeing them all stepping into the breach into an area of national significance. This is trying to become you know, a low carbon economy, trying to revitalize communities, enable development. And I think it's really, really important that on energy especially, we have to kind of get our crap together and figure out how to support these development corporations, because they're the only ones volunteering right now. You know, you have other governments are trying, like if you look at any northern government, they're trying to keep the lights on in communities. That's a very different equation than strategic investment into infrastructure. So I've heard it, you know, it's in my extensive 3 months in the federal government, I've heard it from each of the 3 territories, and I think it's definitely something that's a big priority.
I'm glad you used the turn of phrase, literally keep the lights on, because that's actually what we're talking about when it comes to energy. Any other thoughts from industry or from anyone else on this energy piece and what we need to do to develop it better?
So earlier when we had someone on the stage, and I believe from Northwest Territories, you know, saying that they're trying to address the cost of energy at 36 cents, you know, per kilowatt, I'm like, oh my God, I wish I could have 36 cents. Because the reality is in where I live is residents are paying, if they're not living in public housing, around 63 cents a kilowatt. And if you're in business, I believe, and I could be, you know, corrected, but I think it's around 93 cents. And there's a proposal, you know, by our power corporation to actually increase that by 10.3 cents more. So, but the cost to the Kudlik Energy Corporation, the government of Nunavut, is approximately whatever the per liter cost is. So if it's, I think they paid around 170 a liter, because that's actually what the pump rate is now. So even the government of Nunavut has to subsidize that cost, even when you're paying 63 cents or 93 cents or soon to be $1. So it's a huge cost. It's a huge cost for mines. It's a huge cost for defense. I think your over-horizon radar system is about 15,000 liters of diesel a day. So, you know, these are big, big numbers. And then we have, you know, this goal of it becoming net zero by 2050. So how are we going to get there? And really, I mean, the one good thing is that the government of Nunavut, in developing the proof of purchase power agreement, is that it allows industry to try to now look at finding innovative solutions. And you're right, Jimmy, it's mostly the development corporations that are actively sort of assessing what those might be. And so far we're rolling out a few, smaller projects, wind and or solar. But for the most part, those are not full replacements of the diesel requirements. So it is something that we're all very, very mindful of, and especially when you're talking about, Pangertung lost its power plant and in the winter and for days. And the community that Jimmy's also from in Rankin Inlet, he probably remembers when there was rolling powers in Cambridge Bay rolling powers. We have still quite a number of diesel generators that are at or past their life expectancy of 40 years. So we need to look at what all those energy solutions are, and by seeing if there is a mine, because the mines are often consuming significantly more diesel than our communities. I think Agnico Eagle actually consumes more diesel than even possibly the 5 communities surrounding it. And so, partnering potentially together, we could be looking at, how do we get there together? Because with the carbon tax, that's a pretty big incentive as well. In my community, it's regularly people are posting, it's all of a sudden they're getting power bills for their homes in the $1,000+ range per month. And it is a huge cost. Grocery prices are more expensive. Getting your car fixed is more expensive. So we have to figure out together, as with as many partners as possible, how do we get our communities an energy solution? Is there a mine or is there military nearby? The Coast Guards, the Navy, they all have energy requirements. And so kind of figuring that out and having conversations together, I think is worthwhile. I'm gonna let Sean jump in.
The energy question, to do it cleaner and cheaper, is the nation building exercise. That is the key to unlock the opportunity and the potential here. If we don't answer that, there's minerals that are going to stay there and never be mined.
Yeah, and that's why I was very proud. We've talked a little bit about the Arctic study we did in 2018, all party. We talked about it in the political panel. Even the NDP changed their position, at least briefly, on nuclear to support the development or the potential of SMRs. We're still a ways away, but seeing that importance of energy security, the NDP was even willing to step away from a long-standing anti-nuclear position to say this could be a solution for industry, for communities, for security. Any other thoughts before I open up?
I mean, it has to be one thing on the fuel. It has to be market ready over moonshots, right? I mean, that's clearly what needs to happen. If you take an icebreaker, there was an analysis that I saw in Finland quite recently. An icebreaker that's at full steam on electric power would have to recharge after half a day. It can go 42 days with diesel, right? So there are practical implications. If you also don't have the infrastructure to refuel and recharge, then you've got a big problem, right? So we need to be realistic today, and we need to put the pragmatism first, really.
Absolutely. Brandon?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm going to kind of tie it back to my earlier point. I mean, our company, we install battery backup on ships. We build wind farms. We build run-of-river hydro. But I want to bring it back to this early engagement. And I'll give you a case in point, and it's Kugluktuk. I mean, to my knowledge, that diesel generator replacement project has been tendered at least twice, potentially 3 times. 4 times. We submitted a bid. It was, it was a non-compliant bid, but it was a diesel generator, but it had some elements of solar and some battery energy storage, which I think would have been good. But it was this disconnect between, the risks around that. And anytime you talk risk, you talk dollars and cents. And so it was an uneven sharing of risk, and there was no involvement. And I'm not criticizing anybody, I'm just stating that because, you know, to this day, there's an energy insecurity in that community, and it's going to be the same thing for Joe Haven, for Cambridge Bay, for Aglulik, because I know those are they're in the pipeline to do. And I just think there's a better way to reimagine, you know, not only just the multi-users of that infrastructure, but also getting it done at the end of the day, because that can upend the whole process.
A better way. I'm mindful of time, and I want to make sure, so I'm going to cut off this discussion. Is there anyone with questions from the audience? Because we've had some great engagement in previous sessions, and we're in our final few minutes here, and I don't want to extend it beyond people's patience. Maybe one question over there.
I have a question for Sean. 300 kilometers of road's a lot of road. I think Nunavut used to have 10 kilometers before you got there, so you've added a great deal. So my question is, does that become a stranded asset when you leave? Do you have to remove it, or does it become the backbone for mining to the future?
Well, that's a great question. When Prime Minister Harper was at Meadowbank and stayed overnight back a number of years ago, there was discussion at that breakfast, and Joe Oliver was there, and the discussion was around the requirement at the time was that that road had to be removed from Baker Lake to the mine at Meadowbank, 110 kilometers, which makes no sense at all. And so when you're building, as we said, 300 kilometers of roads, and we'll be building more, those should stay because the local population loves using them. We have to restrict access at times because we've got some large equipment moving up and down. But you know, those roads, being a simple road, have tremendous benefits. Just for the community knowing that they can get around and get around easier. It seems simple, but it's extremely important. And I should say at the initial road from Baker Lake to Meadowbank, there was worries that the caribou would find the road a barrier and the caribou migration would be halted by the road. And I think the caribou answered that question because they just ran over the road like nothing was there. But the roads are symbolic because when we built that first road and we opened the road, the elders from Baker Lake with our senior management were locked arm in arm and crossed the first bridge. I think there's 10 bridges or so, as a symbol of the importance of the road. So the roads need to stay there.
Partnerships, multi-purpose, arm in arm over the bridge. I can't think of a better image to kind of end on. If there's one final question, I think we have time for that. But otherwise, I think this has been a... Is there one more?
Hi there. Sorry to, keep you here for another second, but I'm wondering if there's any particular projects that D&D is a bit more risk adverse to partnering with groups on. I've been doing a lot of research into how defense could partner with Indigenous groups and also industry to build any type of like transportation, communication, or energy infrastructure. So I was wondering if there are any obstacles that you see, and then also if there are any other particular projects other than Hope Bay that any of the panelists know of that really could use D&D funding. So thanks.
David, maybe
Thanks.
you, and then anybody else that wants to weigh in.
Sure, thanks. First of all, I'd like to hear more about your work and trying to make that work better. So thank you for that work. I think it's very critical work. When I look at, NORAD modernization specifically in this context here, but I could go wider in scope in terms of defense capabilities at large. 19 projects, NORAD mod, there's about 13 of them with a known real property infrastructure tie-in. There's a varying degree of partnership ability within those. So some in terms of NORAD, Northern Basin infrastructure, hangar usage, having a part of hangar for a community to use. They could store goods so that if, in terms of some sort of local emergency, that they could use that hangar. In fact, our planners are working with communities to start to look at a concept of designing those so that it's basically a shell, and then you could have modular walls so that you could adapt those. So that's just a kind of a concept at this point. But when you speak about hangars, and then everyone starts to think about the F-35, and so the F-35 has pretty significant security requirements, shielding specifically. We have to work very closely with our U.S. counterparts on that. So there's a range of partnerships that may be available. But even with programs such as the F-35, there's a lot of supporting infrastructure around that. So whether it's the power going in, for example, or the road works, or the security, even speaking with some local communities as well in terms of wanting to become security partners. We're going to need security there. So there's a full range there. I think it's a matter of sharing early and often our own needs, and then opening that up and saying, can someone help us with this? And that's really what we are striving to do.
Thanks. And last word to Jim.
Just very quickly, I think there's an element of this project management piece that's really important. Agnico just had an experience at the Melidian mine where they were first over the wall on a wind project. It didn't go necessarily how it was planned to go, but it makes wind projects in the future probably a lot easier. There's a bit of a roadmap now. And I think for a lot of the NORAD modernization, being the proponent on new technology, whether it's airships or SMRs, there's really no one else placed to do that. So sometimes infrastructure isn't geographically based. It's this idea of getting first through environmental assessment, first through community engagement. And I think we need to apply that lens as well.
Well, I'd like to thank our panel and thank our dedicated audience for sticking it out today. Thank you.
Very good.